Hello and welcome to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast. I'm Nate Goss. The end of the year is right around the corner and the holidays are fast approaching, which means best of lists and gift guides. We at Cook Library like to take a little time to reflect as the year draws to the close, to look back on the year 2017 in books. What were some of our favorite reading experiences, the pleasant surprises, the new authors we got to know, or latest releases from old favorites? So for this podcast episode, we welcome back Jo Hansen from the Popular Services Department to talk about and promote the staff favorites booklets she painstakingly compiles every single year. She's here to share a short summary of what you will find in these booklets, along with some of her personal recommendations from the year. So welcome back, Jo, and thank you so much for being here and for putting these booklets together. I always look forward to them every year.
Thanks, Nate. It's really a lot of fun. A lot of work, too. It takes almost a month to put together, but it really is a lot of fun to see what everyone liked the best for the year.
So we've got two booklets, the fiction and nonfiction. We separate the two of them.
Right. The very first year I put a booklet together was 2011, and that was 7 years ago.
Wow.
And
yeah.
It was an experiment. I did one booklet. I combined fiction and nonfiction, and it had 59 titles, so it wasn't very big. And then, the next year I decided, let's separate the fiction and the nonfiction. And every year the booklet has grown. And this year, it's the biggest it's ever been. The fiction booklet has 156 titles in it.
Wow.
And the nonfiction has 76 titles.
That's really something. I mean, there's a lot to look through in this thing.
There really is. We have something for everyone. So if you're looking for a book to read, really pick these up. They're available at the reference desks at both libraries.
So I should mention that the booklets here, the ones that you put out, they tend to focus on adult books that have come out, not so much like picture books or children's literature.
Right, it's all adult and young adult.
Yeah, so that's kind of the audience we're looking for. However, we did do a brand new publication this year that's a little different. It's not quite the same as our staff favorites, which are very kind of personal from actual people who work here, but we've put together a little holiday gift guide for people who are looking for, some recommendations of books to buy those in their family that we think that pretty much anyone could enjoy. And that at least has a little bit of children's titles. So when you're picking up your staff favorites, the fiction and nonfiction, just be sure to also grab that gift guide. I was leafing through it personally. I've got two 4-year-old boys, and so the children's part, I was looking through that, and I already found one book that they liked that I got as a suggestion from the book, and that was After the Fall, which is a Humpty Dumpty book by Dan Santat. I don't really know how you say his name, but the illustrations are wonderful, and it's just a twist on the traditional Humpty Dumpty fairy tale.
Well, that sounds great. And, there's nothing better, in my opinion, than to get a book as a gift.
Yeah.
And the holiday gift guide has a lot of really great ideas. And if you want even more ideas, our favorite fiction and nonfiction will give you even more ideas.
Absolutely. Now, so you've been doing this is, you said 7 years, right? Mm-hmm. Now, can you kind of talk a little bit about how these are actually compiled, how the selections are made?
Sure. Really, it starts at the beginning of the year where you start reading. And our staff, we read a lot. And I'm always, when I finish a book, I always think, will this make the final cut at the end of the year? And that's always fun to see. And there's a lot of good books I read that didn't make the cut, even though I recommend a lot. But it can't be all my books.
Right.
The booklet would be too big. And sometimes books surprise me. They'll stay with me, and then I know it's a good book because I'll keep thinking about it like 3 months later and go, yeah, that's something I think I could recommend to people.
It lingers a little bit.
It does.
So I'm just curious, just for you personally, how many books do you think you read just this year alone?
Well, right now I think I'm at about 80.
Wow.
Which to me is not very much. I wish I could read faster.
Well, that's why you're a member of the Popular Services Department. You kind of compound that by the other members of the staff plus the suggestions you get from. I mean, there's a lot of reading going on in this building.
There's a lot of reading going on. And I start bugging people in November and say, okay, start thinking about what you're going to send me. Because it takes quite a while to compile all the titles and get the descriptions and the formatting right. And so I work on it all through November, and then in December, when that comes around, I say, this is it, guys. You got to finish reading and let me know what you like. And I never have a problem with fiction. I always have so much fiction. Nonfiction is a little more challenging because you have to get the number just right for the booklets. And so that's my personal challenge, is to read nonfiction, because I don't very much.
Now, when you're putting together the nonfiction booklet, for example, are there times where, as the sort of editor of this, you're putting in books that you personally haven't read? Is there a certain title that really jumped out to you this year that you're like, just because it's on this list alone, I feel like I need to read this?
Yes. I think one of the more popular titles that was nominated by 4 staffers is a nonfiction book called Killers of the Flower Moon. And it's made so many best lists. I think it's the number one nonfiction book that made numerous lists. I track this at the end of the year because I'm a geek that way. I love tracking all the best lists. And of the 12 lists I've tracked, that one made almost all of them. And it's about the early days of the FBI, and it just sounds great. So if you do like crime fiction, you might like to pick up Killers of the Flower Moon in nonfiction and give that a read. I
can actually say, I haven't read the book, but I can say that I've already bought it as a gift for someone in my family. I doubt he's going to listen to this podcast, so I can blow the surprise. But it's actually, I got it for my father because he's actually really into Native American books and books about Native Americans. I know there's a little sort of, I don't know if it's a subplot or there's something having to do with a Native American tribe.
Yeah, it's about the Osage tribe.
Yeah.
The staffers who read it just raved about it. The other one that I think you read that I really want to read, seems like everybody read it, was the Dear Fahrenheit 451. And it's a librarian writing letters to books.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on
it? It's no surprise that a lot of librarians recommended this book, but I think even if you're not a librarian, you'll really like it if you just like to read, because it's basically, she is Annie Spence is the author. We actually interviewed her. If you want to dig back through our archives a couple episodes ago, we had her on the podcast, and she was a great interview as well. She's just a very funny, good writer, and she loves books. And so she writes these letters, not to the authors, not to, us as the readers. She writes the letters to these books. And some of them are, her love letters to them. Some of them are breakup letters because as a librarian, you have to get rid of books once in a while. And sometimes it's a breakup letter because it's a book that she read that she just doesn't like anymore. And so it kind of tackles how we change as readers as well. And at the end, actually probably a good quarter of the book at the end is just her really cleverly titled in different types of thematic book lists. So if you're looking for another book that will just give you a lot more books on your to-read list, that book is great as well. That's called Dear Fahrenheit 451.
Right.
That's actually a letter she writes to Fahrenheit 451.
Right. Oh, that sounds great. But for the nonfiction, we did pretty well this year, hitting all the Dewey Decimal categories. We had almost every category, except we didn't have anything in the 200s, such as religion, this year, and we didn't have any in the 400s, such as language, and that's a tough category because there just aren't that many books about language.
Yeah. Although I think with religion, one of the books I recommended, which technically got cataloged with film, was called Movies Are Prayers, which is by Josh Larson.
There you go. So we kind of got it in there.
Yeah, you cheat a little bit, fudge a little bit, and you got a little of religion in there.
But when you look at the most popular categories in nonfiction by the staff, we really liked history and geography. We also like memoirs. But the biggest one is social sciences. You'll find a lot of good ideas in there.
Do you have an example of like just one title from the social sciences that would actually make this list? Because it's a topic that I don't think a lot of people would think of as like a page turner. Do you know what I mean? Like that you would pick up.
That's true.
But these are all staff favorites, meaning that we actually not only were we learning things, but we actually enjoyed learning the stuff in the book.
Yeah, that's right. Joe Murrow recommended one called Nomadland: Surviving America in the 21st Century. And it's written by a journalist named Jessica Bruder, who sets out on the road to explore the new phenomenon of work campers, who are migrant workers made up of transient older Americans who took to the road after discovering that their Social Security came up short and their mortgages were underwater. So these are people who live in campers and go from place to place. And
I've actually heard a lot about that book, actually. A lot of people have found it to be pretty eye-opening and a great read.
And the other one that's kind of interesting, and it's not in the 300s, though, Some of you may have heard of Douglas Preston. He's a novelist, but he also has a nonfiction book in the 900s, which is history again and geography, and it's called Lost City of the Monkey Gods. He's the co-author of the FBI agent Pendergast series, and here is a nonfiction book he wrote, a high-suspense account of the discovery of a lost civilization. And that sounded really cool. Jean recommended that one. And it's this lost civilization were the contemporaries of the Mayans who lived in the Honduran jungles. And then we even have a couple cookbooks.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You know, my favorite one in there was, it's actually, we have it in our graphic novel collection, but it's actually a cookbook, too, called Cook Korean. So you might have to go downstairs where the graphic novels are, but it really is nonfiction, and it's some great recipes on how to introduce Korean food to your kitchen.
And actually, if you want to dig through our archives, Jean, one of our librarians here, she recommended Cook Korean and talked about it on the podcast for a few minutes.
Did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Lots of excuses to dig back and go through the year in a podcast as well.
Yeah.
So talking about we talked a lot about the nonfiction booklet. Now, the fiction booklet, anybody can kind of Google and look up the lists that are put out by the big publications, the NPR book list they put out, the New York Times, Publishers Weekly, all these places. Do you have an example of a book that's in our booklet that's kind of unique to us, that would make someone want to pick this out, even if they had read all the lists from all the other places that are putting out the top list of the year?
Yes, there's we have a lot of books on here that we just enjoy that aren't necessarily like the best books of the year according to the critics, but ones that we think readers would enjoy. Mm-hmm. And for example, one that I really liked was a thriller called The Marsh King's Daughter by Karen Dion. And this takes place up in Michigan. And she imagines this woman who grew up in the middle of nowhere in Michigan. And she was the result of her mother getting kidnapped as a teenager. And so this man kept the teenager captive, and then she had a baby. And so it's just a really great thriller, a real big page-turner. I think people would like it. And she learned how to use her survival skills, and she ended up escaping from her father. So it's just a real great page-turner, but it didn't really make a lot of best lists. But
sometimes that's what you want, is just something that's going to keep you really engrossed. Not necessarily like the finest literature of the year, but, something that's just a great story that keeps you engaged.
Exactly. And I know one book that's really hot right now, and I haven't read, but there's quite a few holds on it. It's called Before We Were Yours. It's historical fiction by Lisa Wingate. And I've had patrons come up to me and tell me, oh, you need to read this. And this was recommended by Sonia and Becky on staff. The description is, learning that their grandmother was the victim of a corrupt Tennessee Children's Home Society, attorney and aspiring politician Avery Stafford delves into her family's past and begins to wonder if some things are best kept secret. So it's got this kind of family secrets, historical fiction, and orphans. It's just supposed to be really good, and it's a hot book club book now.
Yeah. Oh.
But you won't see that on a best list either, And so that's the kind of thing that why you want to pick this up, because you'll see a lot of different things. And all the books are categorized by the genre type. But our staffers, we like crime fiction. That's probably the number one category. If you combine all the mystery, suspense, and thrillers, there's like 40 books in there. So if you like crime fiction, you got a lot in there. And there's also a lot of historical fiction. There's 23 titles of historical fiction. But we also have, we have 16 titles in fantasy. We have science fiction, even some horror, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Which you wouldn't catch me reading, but thank goodness for Mark, because he does. And graphic novels, a little bit of everything.
So what are some ways that you, when you're compiling this, that you make sure that there's something for everyone?
I keep track, and I want to make sure that, like, for example, it's not all crime novels. And
Even though that might be what we read a lot of. But
right.
Yeah.
Well, like Mark and Heather tend to read our horror novels. They're on staff. And so I will always go up to them and say, you have some horror for me, don't you? And they say, oh, yes, we'll send you something. And we also have Heather and a couple other staffers are really good at reading young adult fiction. And so they send us those titles too. So I go after people and say, make sure we have something, Like there's certain staffers you just know will read certain things. Like Joe Morrow likes to read science fiction. And so that gets represented pretty well.
Yeah. So it's sort of a diversity of the staff tastes are represented in the booklets.
It is. And, you know, with fiction, I often have too many titles at the end of the year. So what I'll do is balance it out and make sure we have as many of the different categories represented.
So were there some books in the fiction booklet that were the most popular among staff, just a lot of people recommending them?
Yes, there were. The number one title, which didn't surprise me because it usually is the number one author every year, is Louise Penny.
Oh, okay.
The staff, she has a fan base among our staff, and her newest book is called Glass Houses, and it's the newest book in the Armand Gamache Three Pines series, and it's a wonderful mystery series set in Quebec, Canada. And if you haven't read Louise Penny, please do. I mean, she's a wonderful mystery writer. It's good to start at the beginning with It's Just Still Life. But I know we've plugged her quite a bit on these podcasts, but that's how much we love her.
Yeah.
But Glass Houses is the latest, and that got the most. We got 7 staffers recommending it.
So it didn't disappoint, at least.
Oh, no, it was wonderful. And the next 2 books that 6 staffers recommended, they're a little different. You know, you're not your typical books. One was Lincoln and the Bardo.
That was one of my recommendations.
By George Saunders. Yeah. And I know it's not everyone's cup of tea. I know some people say I just couldn't get into it because you're basically got a bunch of ghosts talking in a cemetery watching Abraham Lincoln grieve over his son. Mm-hmm. And you learn a lot about the time period from the ghosts, you know, and they observe and they're witty and funny. But it's a little different, you know.
Yeah, I almost recommend to people, if you don't read the book, at least just pick it up and flip through it just so you can see how it's written, because it's written really unlike anything that you've seen in a long time.
Exactly. And I think people who work at libraries like books that are a little unusual, you know, and that one was definitely one of those books this year. Yeah. And the other one that's a little different is called Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. I'm probably saying his name wrong. But anyway, it's these 2 young people are in a war-torn country, and they fall in love, and they're trying to escape, and they want to get away from the war, and they find out there's these doors that will open up and take you to a different part of the world, totally different, and they escape that way. So he uses a little magical realism, but to talk about war and trying to escape war and immigrants trying to find a new home, and it's really beautifully written. And that one, like I said, had 6 staffers who recommended it. I was one of them, too. And so it's a little different but very moving. I think people, you know, should give it a shot.
And just because you're here, and I want to ask you, this is your chance. What was like your just personal favorite this year? The one that really just like you think's going to hang with you for a long time, maybe even become one of your all-time new favorites?
Well, boy, that's hard because there's so many, Nate.
Out of the 80.
Of the 80, yes. Well, Lincoln and the Bardo and Exit West were 2 of my favorites. The third one that I really loved was called Sing Unburied Sing by Jesmyn Ward. And if you want to read something a little more diverse, it's about a young boy who's trying to make it when he has a drug addict mother and his father was in prison, and beautifully written again. So give that a shot if you're looking for something a little different to read. Yeah,
that one might actually be a good candidate for what we've got coming up, the Reading Without Walls program we've got coming up. If you are, you know, like me, just a white guy from the suburbs, you know, it would be a good way to kind of put some diversity into my reading habits.
Yeah. That would be an excellent choice. It's a little different. Yeah, and try to do that. The Reading Without Walls over 3 months, January, February, March. Actually, it started now. So you have 3 months to read 3 books in different categories. So come to the reference desk. We have a checklist for you to pick up, and we will be giving out a prize at the end, too.
Yeah, so you got a lot to do at the reference desk now. You got to pick up 3 booklets, and you've got to get some information about Reading Without Walls and challenge yourself a little bit for next year to read a little bit out of your comfort zone.
That's right. Winter is coming, so you'll need a lot of reading materials, so just come see us. We'll be happy to find you something.
So let's just talk about practical stuff. So if someone really wants the booklet, where can they go to get these booklets?
All you have to do is come into the library and go to the reference desk. And you can also find the booklets online on our Books, Movies, and Music page. There will be links there so you can actually sit at home and look at them.
All right. Well, Jo, I just want to thank you so much again for coming on the podcast. And I hope that everyone listening really got a chance to get some good ideas for reading and will come and check out those booklets.
Thanks, Nate. It's been fun.
All right, so Jo just let you know all the different ways that you can get one of those booklets in your hands. We also, in the podcast show notes, take a look. We've put the links to the online versions of these booklets in the show notes, so you can just click on that link and take a look yourself right now. Or, as Jo mentioned, you will be able to find those booklets linked on our Books, Movies, Music page of our website. That website is www.cooklib.org. And while you're there on that website, looking at that booklet, searching the catalog, requesting those books in the booklets, make sure that you take a moment just to visit our blog, Shelf Life. That's the library's blog. It's where a lot of us here at Cook Library post about what we're reading. You'll also find all sorts of local history things and genealogy advice and just different news about the library. That blog can be found at shelflife.cooklib.org. If you're a listener to this podcast, we would love to hear from you. You can talk to us anytime on Twitter. The library's handle is @CookLibrary, all one word. Or you can send us an email. Webmaster@cooklib.org is where you can send those. We'd love to hear what you're thinking about the show, maybe even throw us a few show ideas if you've got them. And, if you're liking this podcast, the best thing you can do for us is just share it. Share it with others. Share it on your social media. If you really want to go above and beyond, something you can do is just leave us a nice little kind rating on Apple Podcasts. We hope you have a wonderful holiday season, a very happy new year, and we will be back soon. But until then, keep reading, keep watching, and keep listening.